pretty well everything else that the company produces is assumed to have a positive benefit of the audit. So the other information, how much we agonize about standards over information that accompanies audited financial statements, most people just assume, well, it's with the audited financial statements, so it's okay. And the organization, even if we're only saying that it's produced this precise set of information properly, they're assumed to be, well, generally good people with good governance, because otherwise why would you be associated with them? And that's a real vulnerability of auditors, which isn't going to go away. That's just how human beings work. That's how every auditor works when they're looking at any association of other people with other things. So that's a real vulnerability. There's no amount of caveats and the defensive language that was talked about that we've innovated in audit reports over the year can ever get around. And actually, whether or not we've specifically given a report which within a framework is classified as being assurance, there's an assumed assurance, reputational association of agreed upon procedures or even compilation. So that means that there's a real vulnerability for being in the audit business. And in our work in the Audit Quality Forum and Reassurance, we just accepted that. Unless you're going to change human beings, then those things are going to be there. I'm not talking about the detailed issues of risk management, where of course you can manage liability to make sure it doesn't work in the courts, but talk to me about the actual settlements against auditors as a result of the financial crisis versus the actual perceived reputational shortcomings of the audit profession. I'm afraid there's no link between the two. And if we're going to talk about vulnerability, this is what we do in a lot of the audit insights reports. Actually get auditors together, and once you start them talking, they will talk about the real problems in the industries they face. We've now written 6 of these reports, one on banking. So apart from the fact that banks are struggling with something we don't know how to do, which is achieve cultural change on a massive scale across organizations with tens of thousands of employees, apart from the fact that in the major markets of the world where banks have grown by acquisition, they have fragile IT systems which are stuck together with sellotape and which nobody can rebuild because you can't take the service down for any period of time. And apart from the fact that they are completely confused by the variety of metrics that they have to operate to keep up with all the different regulatory requirements, not to mention the expectations of different investors. Apart from that, they're in great shape. We really have, through regulatory action and a few thousand pages of rulemaking, we really have sorted out banking. And actually, it's quite a release to actually say that we still face real problems. The report on cybersecurity we did said, actually, has everyone really caught up with the fact that whereas in a physical world you could have some ideal that your security would not be breached, everyone is being breached every day. What you're doing is what you have to do is just make sure those breaches aren't too serious and they're not attacking your key information and operational crown jewels. Change the mindset. And this idea of vulnerability was beautifully captured in a philosopher that we invited to take part in our Audit Futures initiative. You'll see I've subtly referenced all 4 initiatives now in this first example, who said that actually trust is the optimistic acceptance of vulnerability, which is something I could just leave the stage and say, well, just reflect on that for the next half hour. But it's a lovely idea. Actually, the world is full of ignorance, uncertainty, vulnerability. And what auditors are trying to do is just create some islands of confidence and certainty. Actually, we do need to say that we help make the glass half full. But actually, in terms of the basic limitations of what humans can do, it's pretty empty. We actually met an investor as part of this program who said, a very learned investor, saying, do you realize that Adam Smith didn't believe the sort of markets we have today were possible? Adam Smith didn't believe it was possible to have joint stock companies, as he thought, which would actually be trusted with other people's money. We have helped create things which, for many of the brightest people in history, have been completely impossible. We should celebrate that ability to bring some trust into a position of fundamental uncertainty and ignorance. And suddenly, we become very positive figures. We're not apologizing because, having kept quiet about this vulnerability, something's gone wrong. And we say, oh no, everything's supposed to be perfect, and it's gone wrong. What we should say is the normal state of affairs is things go wrong, and we should be celebrating what more we can do to make things go right. So that leads me on to my can-do attitude. We put out a report called Audit of Banks, Lessons from the Crisis, without accepting that auditors were the cause of the crisis, but if they didn't accept what they could do more in response to the crisis, then they would be being dilatory. And this identified some basic needs to engage better with regulators, to be more fulsome in risk descriptions, to have better engagement with audit committees, and to press the regulator, all the regulators, to speak to the auditors. If auditors want to have a meeting, they shall have a meeting, and we're going to turn up and have a meeting whether or not you want it. Change the mindset so that there are things we can do, and we don't have to wait for any legislative or regulatory change to make things happen. In our reassurance work, we've volunteered to apply the ISSB framework and ISA 3000 to new areas. When the Commodity Futures Trading Commission in the US issued its findings and fine and regulatory orders against Barclays for LIBOR manipulation, it so happened that a couple of us from the Institute were in Washington at the time and said, we'll go around and see them and say, would you like a framework for giving assurance on submissions to benchmarks? And they said, thank you very much. No auditor's ever been to visit us before. It's lovely to see you, and why don't you go and do that? Because it will mean that when we implement these measures against the bank and other banks, then we won't have all the time being spent on our lawyers arguing with the bank's lawyers, arguing with the auditor's lawyers about precisely what's going to be done. We'll just get on and do it. Curiously, that led to an admission that the area they were really worried about, along with ISCA, was oil price reporting benchmarks. And so the guidance we've produced is also applicable there. Whether it meant that the great oil price reporting scandal of 2013 that never happened was averted, I don't know, but that's the curse, as I said yesterday, of good risk management. I won't go through too many of these, going to see people to offer to do things, but when new pension legislation in the UK required every employer to set up a scheme for employees, or they had to opt out of it, in order to build confidence in private sector providers, other than the government-backed provider of these schemes, we went to see the pensions regulator and said, would it be good to have an assurance report on so-called master trust offerings to give assurance on their governance and controls frameworks? And not surprisingly, they said yes. And actually, when we look at what it is that people want, it's not that difficult. I mean, there's endless opportunities. People want simple things like, yes, financial information and a clear narrative, an explanation of why things happened, that people broadly comply with the law, that they're not ruining the environment, that they pay the right amount of tax, that they behave ethically, that they have fair treatment of their customers, investors and others, and that they live up to their promises. These are not difficult things, and these things can be assured. A little bit of work to go into developing criteria, but they can be done. And that's why I'd be hugely optimistic that however difficult we might try and make it, integrated reporting can be assured. It might be best done in stages, and we have a publication about a journey. Don't try and make one huge giant leap forward, make incremental progress, but it's possible. So, we've done a little bit on admitting vulnerability and having a can-do attitude. Let's go on to the operating in a glass box. It's quite important if we're going to say we're open to meeting the needs of society to actually invite new people in to help you, rather than say, don't worry, we're doing it over here. We'll tell you when we've done it. So we've opened up to people you would never have thought of. So the Royal Society of Arts, some of you will have seen the report that through Audit Futures we commissioned from them to just take a sociological, political economist, political scientist view of the audit profession and say what we should be doing. We opened ourselves up to Royal College of Art design students. And I should say here that designers are probably misunderstood almost as much as auditors. Designers aren't people who just take a product and make it kind of look pretty. The fundamentals of design are around making sure that you actually design something which meets human needs. And we said, well, in the burgeoning field of service design, let's get people thinking about what auditors might do. Actually, a few months ago, 5 master's students, who I should say, 3 of them were from this part of the world, but they're in London at the Royal College of Art, presented their ideas. All of them were encouraging us as a profession to just think differently about what we do. Somebody said he actually asked his friends whether any of them had a clue what auditors did, and none of them did. So he said, wasn't it strange? We teach school kids everything through the most wonderful museums today, which they can understand everything from Newton to Einstein. It will be explained to them. We're not as complicated as Newton and Einstein. We should be able to do this with wonderful interactive discussions. Let's have a museum of auditing. And he started designing it. And it would have stories, interesting stories from auditors about how they'd helped make things happen, how things broke down when there was a loss of trust. We don't try and do that. He said, why not? Another student said, it's very strange. What you do is you audit something which is right at the end of the process. So it's financial statements. Shouldn't you start off with the purpose of a company? Of course, that follows through into processes, what they do, and then there are some financial reports which show whether they've been doing it. But why don't you start off with saying, is this company basically achieving its purpose? And then you might find later on that people want assurance on the numbers. It actually goes back to, I think, the point Arnold made about we're used to having numbers with some text around, and I get lots of text with a few numbers to support it. Why don't we rethink audit from purpose of companies? I could go through all 5, but just to show that these were not things that had been regularly considered by any of the committees that studied auditing within the Institute. Why don't you have an ideal of an auditor as a superhero who actually kind of sweeps in and is prepared to give some sort of assurance, some kind of seal that says, I've been here and this company, it does the most important things it says it's going to do. Choose what those things are, but the auditor's been here. The auditor is superhero. Why don't you, this is the 4th out of 5, all 5 ideas were interesting. Why don't you actually pay a lot more attention to building trust within organizations? Because if there's trust within organizations, they can project that trust to the outside world. You can't create a trustworthy organization if within it there's no sense of trust between the people who work there. So that's not internal audit, but that's internally focused audit as the basis for people actually believing companies. A starting point of that is that people outside believe that the way the company works inside is with trust. The final suggestion of the 5 was that really so much now depends upon not-for-profit kind of organisations, where there's a very different understanding of what it is that people investing in those organisations can do. What could you innovate by way of people being able to see their money being spent, which would build trust in not-for-profits, charitable organisations and so on? Now, if I then get to some final areas of pushback, we might start pushing back on various people. And once you've got the confidence that you're doing things, you're enabled to do this. We had an Audit Quality Forum event in which there was real challenge to investors as why don't they ask for new assurance on KPIs? What do they actually use in their investment evaluation? And why don't they object if a company isn't volunteering to have it assured? I mean, are they just setting themselves up for a subsequent legal case that, well, the great thing is we didn't know what was happening and the numbers weren't reliable, but we made sure that we didn't have any basis for relying on them so that we can sue somebody? Just wake up. And if you're not going to do it, then we'll say that you're not doing it. Our report on retail said, like-for-like sales numbers, most of the KPIs that companies lead with are unreliable. What are you going to do about it? That's a major concern of auditors in the retail sector. What moves the market in stupid things like who won Christmas are completely unreliable, unaudited numbers. We also thinking about pushing back. I won't go into it now because it might spoil some of the afternoon, but if we want to build trust, are the notions of skepticism really the ones we start out with? Are notions that actually you can't provide any non-audit services, are they the ones we start out with? Skepticism. It's a bit like what Catherine Schipper said yesterday. How much of it do you want? Because it seems that when auditors look at how their audits are reported on by regulators, they always want more. Well, okay, we can have more of it, and we'll just make sure that we won't report on any 2014 numbers until at least 3014. Because then we'll know for sure. I mean, we cannot adopt some fundamental philosophical skepticism. So how much do you want? Otherwise, you're just on a losing wicket for the regulators forever. And independence non-audit services, is that assuming that people can't be trusted? Because if they are, you're not going to use further and further limitation of non-audit services to build trust. You just said these people can't be trusted, but don't worry, we don't give them anything to not be trusted with. I mean, you've accepted that auditors can't be trusted, so don't complain when auditors aren't trusted. So these are real pushbacks, even with big firms. They find the RSA report really challenges whether in using the technology and the variety of competences that are required to do new forms of assurance, then maybe the hegemony of the major firms is not inevitable. We've agonized over market concentration, but why, in a newly connected world using technology, can't we have anyone empowered to be part of an alliance that can do some work? So, my time's nearly up. Well, in fact, the clock says it is up, but I think I started a bit late. Let me just anticipate some of the objections. First of all, it's all very nice, but we're absolutely exhausted by regulatory reform, ever-increasing, complicated accounting standards. There's too much to do. We'll get to this later when all that regulatory stuff has stopped changing. Haven't you heard there's a whole set of new requirements in Europe that nobody knows what they mean? I mean, we've just got to get through all this. Well, you know, I think everyone who's ever done something ambitious and brilliant and innovative has still had to do things like, you know, do the washing up, look after their kids, do all those things. I mean, there'll always be things to do. But we just need to make sure we leave some time for the big things. You could say, what about the litigation risk? Absolutely. But this is actually a matter of national competitive advantage. In the United States, if the litigation risk is so great people can't do things, and it's about 9 years ago in the UK through the Audit Quality Forum we accepted that you should identify the audit partner in the audit report. It's still a major matter of debate in the United States. If they have a regulatory litigation regime, which means they can't make change, then isn't that great for places like Singapore that want to be centres of the accountancy profession? This is how power always transfers from old empires to new empires because the old empire can't cope with the new world. Sorry, I didn't really say that about the United States. I think the United States is still fantastic, but we can't say because in part of the world there are big constraints that nobody can do it. We can say, well, we're accountants, we can't do all this. Of course you can't do all this. It's what are we prepared to accommodate within a broad accountancy profession. And I was really encouraged yesterday, the way that Singapore is opening up to the idea that people with many backgrounds, different talents will come into the profession. That's great. People can have different specializations, different backgrounds. So don't worry, not everyone has to do everything. And then, of course, you can't start this on your own. I appreciate nobody can start this on their own, but actually there's an interplay between institutes like ISCA and my own and individuals. The two work together. There are things which individuals can do which institutions can't do. There are things which institutions can do which empower individuals. It's a working together, and that's what professional bodies are about, and we're very encouraged by the direction of travel in Singapore. And I suppose, just to summarize, I'll say that there's a lot of change going on. The audit reporting changes are great, but just see those as the beginning and think of what the agenda for radical change will be. And also bear in mind something which we've been very much aware of in the Audit Futures programme. Think about stage of career. I did jokingly say I've been involved in all this for about 35 years. Actually, in terms of useful life, I have very little left compared to a lot of people. And actually, isn't it strange? We have the decision-making and the authority and the people we listen to are those who have least skin in the game. I mean, actually, people say, well, I'm pretty well safe now to the end of my career, and I'm in a position of leadership. So what we do with Audit Futures is we have an Audit Futures university program where we say we're going to talk about the people who haven't even decided to join the auditing profession. Say, what sort of a profession would you want to join and you could think of being part of for 50 years? And you get a very different point of view about what we should be doing to have that length of useful life. And maybe all of us who are a little bit older